He had spent 10 years believing she left him, 10 years building an empire on a lie someone else told, and in the space of one photograph, grainy, ordinary, taken from a distance, everything Kang Tae-jin thought he knew about betrayal collapsed inward like a building swallowing its own foundation. Two boys, identical, 10 years old, walking beside the woman he had never stopped hating, the woman he had never stopped loving. If you've ever been robbed of something that was yours and never knew it until it was almost too late, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The party was already too loud by 9 o'clock. The rooftop terrace of the Hansung Grand had been dressed in white orchids and imported crystal, and 200 of Seoul's most powerful people were eating and laughing and watching each other the way powerful people always did, not to enjoy the company, but to inventory it. Politicians in dark suits stood near the bar counting favors. Corporate executives traded compliments with the precision of men exchanging legal documents. The women were dressed in colors that cost more than most families earned in a year, and their laughter rose and fell with the practiced rhythm of people performing contentment rather than feeling it. Kang Tae-jin stood near the eastern railing with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. He was 41 years old, built the way certain men are built when years of controlled violence have settled into something quieter. Broad through the shoulders, still as stone, with dark eyes that moved across a room the way security cameras moved, slow and complete, and missing nothing. The charcoal suit was Savile Row. The watch was worth more than the suit and the room it was standing in. He wore money the way soldiers wore rank, not to impress, but to remind. Across the terrace, Min Seoa was laughing at something one of her father's associates had said. She was beautiful in the way that serious money produced beautiful things, precise, polished, without a single detail out of place. She was 34. She ran her family's pharmaceutical division with the kind of competence that made her father proud and made her rivals nervous. In 4 hours, Tae-jin was scheduled to stand beside her at the center of this terrace and announce their engagement to everyone present. He had agreed to this arrangement 11 months ago. Not from love. He understood that clearly. It was strategy. The Kang organization needed the legitimacy the Min family's corporate network provided, and Chairman Min Gwang-ho needed the kind of protection that only Tae-jin's name could buy. Seoa understood this. He understood this. The arrangement was clean because everyone involved was too intelligent to pretend it was something else. He was prepared to go through with it. Then his phone buzzed once. He pulled it from his inside jacket pocket, expecting the routine surveillance digest his security director sent every evening at 9. Neighborhood reports, competitor movements, low-level incident flags from the organization's outer network. He read these the way other men read weather forecasts. Useful, unexciting, easily forgotten. He opened the message. The first image was a standard street photograph. Quiet residential area, low-rise apartment buildings, a park visible at the edge of the frame. Late afternoon light. A woman walking on the sidewalk with 2 children. Tae-jin almost scrolled past it. His thumb stopped. He brought the phone closer to his face. The woman was black, American by the look of her posture and her dress. A natural ease in the way she moved that Seoul never quite produced. She was wearing a dark green jacket, her hair pulled back simply. She was carrying groceries in a reusable bag, the strap digging into one shoulder, and she was looking down at one of the 2 boys beside her with an expression that was pure exhaustion and pure tenderness at the same time. The face of a woman who had been running on not enough sleep for longer than anyone should have to. He knew that face. He had spent years trying to stop knowing that face. Amara. His lungs did something involuntary. Not a breath. More like the cessation of one. His body processed the image before his mind caught up with it, and for 3 seconds that felt considerably longer. Kang Tae-jin. A man who had sat across negotiating tables from people who wanted him dead and never once shown them anything. Stood on a lit rooftop in front of 200 people and simply stopped functioning. Then he looked at the boys. They were identical. Same height, same build, same close-cropped hair. They looked to be around 10 years old, possibly just under. The age where a boy's face still carries enough softness that you can read the child inside, but the structure underneath is already beginning to declare itself. One of the boys was talking, his mouth moving rapidly, his hands gesturing, animated in the way only very confident or very comfortable children gestured. The other boy walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly down, watching the ground, the way boys watch the ground when they're thinking about something they don't know how to say yet. Taejin's hand tightened on the phone. He scrolled to the report attached below the image. His security director had flagged this as a low-priority neighborhood sweep. His teams ran rotating checks on several international districts as part of their standard intelligence maintenance. And this photograph had been captured 4 days ago in a residential ward he'd had under occasional monitoring for reasons entirely unrelated to anything personal. Pure accident. Pure devastating accident. The caption beneath the image read, "Subject, unidentified female, Asian American appearance. 2 male children, approximate ages 9 to 11. Relationship, probable mother. No threat indicators. File, incidental capture. Incidental capture." He read the date stamp, the location. He ran the numbers the way he always ran numbers. Automatically, precisely, without mercy. 10 years ago, Amara had been 3 months pregnant when she left. 3 months. Taejin put the phone in his pocket. He set his untouched whiskey on the railing with a steadiness that was entirely artificial. Then he walked across the terrace toward the exit without speaking to anyone, and the crowd parted around him the way crowds always parted around him. And nobody said anything because nobody who worked for Kang Taejin said anything when he moved like that. Jaw set, eyes aimed at something no one else could see, the quiet around him suddenly carrying a different quality. The way quiet carries a different quality just before something breaks. His driver was waiting at the basement level. Taejin got in the car, closed the door, and said 2 words. "Han Do-yeon." The driver didn't ask for clarification. He pulled out of the parking structure and headed north. Han Do-yeon lived in a modest house in Mapo district that had always struck Taejin as a deliberate understatement. A man with Do-yeon's access and influence who chose to live simply, who kept a small garden and drove an unremarkable car, whose home contained an enormous private study lined floor to ceiling with files he'd spent 40 years accumulating. Taejin had walked through that study 100 times since childhood. He had trusted Han Do-yeon with everything. Han Do-yeon was 68 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of steady, measured presence that Taejin had always associated with wisdom. He had served Taejin's father for 20 years before becoming Taejin's own chief advisor when the transition of power came. He was the man Taejin called before he called anyone else. He was the closest thing to a father Taejin had known since the original had died. The drive took 19 minutes. Taejin didn't knock. Han Do-yeon was in the study when Taejin walked in, seated at his desk with reading glasses on and a stack of documents in front of him. He looked up without alarm. He had stopped being alarmed by unannounced arrivals decades ago. "Taejin, you should be at the party. Show me what you have on Amara Brooks." A pause. Very small. Just a fraction of a second. The kind of pause a person who had spent decades controlling their reactions produced when something hit the one place they hadn't fully armored. "I don't know what you—" "Don't." Taejin crossed the room and placed his phone on the desk, the photograph facing upward. "Show me what you have." Han Do-yeon looked at the photograph for a long time. His expression didn't collapse dramatically. He was too controlled for that. What happened instead was more precise. A kind of settling, the way a structure settles when the tension holding it in an unnatural position is finally released. He took off his reading glasses. "Sit down," he said. "No." The older man was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a plain manila folder. He set it on the desk without looking at Taejin. "Your father's files. I've kept them here for 11 years. I kept them because I didn't have the courage to destroy them and didn't have the courage to show them to you." Taejin picked up the folder. What was inside took him 40 minutes to read. He read standing. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. Han Do-yeon remained at his desk in silence, and the only sounds in the room were the occasional turn of a page and, once, a car passing on the street outside. When he finished, he set the folder back down on the desk with the same steadiness he'd used to set down the whiskey glass on the rooftop railing. The steadiness of a man who had decided that no one in this room was going to see what the contents of those pages had done to him. The documents were meticulously organized. His father had always been meticulous. Financial transfers, signed authorizations, legal correspondence, a flight record, a letter written in Korean that had been translated into English at the bottom and then translated back, the translator's name removed. There was a payment receipt. There was a signed witness statement from a man Tae-jin recognized as a mid-level legal fixer who had died in an unrelated incident 6 years ago. The file told a story that could be summarized in a single sentence. Amara Brooks had not left Kang Tae-jin. She had been removed. 3 months pregnant, 24 years old, in a country where she had no family and no network beyond the man she had married, she had been presented with a set of documents by 2 of his father's lawyers and told that her marriage had been annulled under a procedural provision she was too unfamiliar with Korean family law to contest. She had been told that Tae-jin himself had authorized it, that he had decided their arrangement was no longer viable, that if she accepted the relocation package and signed the confidentiality agreements, the matter would be settled cleanly, that if she didn't, her immigration status would become complicated in ways that were difficult to predict. She had been 24 years old and 3 months pregnant and alone. She had signed. Tae-jin stood in Han Do-yoon's study and looked at the signature at the bottom of the last document, Amar's handwriting, which he still recognized, and felt something move through him that had no clean name. Not grief exactly, though it was in that family. Not rage, though that was in there too, lower and hotter and looking for somewhere to go. Something closer to the sensation of discovering that the ground you'd been standing on for 10 years wasn't ground at all. She thought I sent them, he said. It wasn't a question. Han Do-yoon answered it anyway. Yes. And I thought she left. Yes. You knew. Another pause, longer this time. I knew when it happened. Your father told me the day after. He said it was necessary. That your focus couldn't afford personal complications when you were still consolidating the organization's position. That the American girl was a liability. That it would hurt for a time, but you would recover. Han Do-yoon removed his glasses entirely and set them on the desk. I told myself it was already done, that nothing I said would reverse it, that you were already in pain and adding the truth would only... Stop! Tae-jin's voice was flat, not loud. Flat, the way a surface is flat when everything on it has been cleared off. Don't tell me what you told yourself. Han Do-yoon closed his mouth. Tae-jin picked up the manila folder. He walked out of the study. He walked out of the house. He got into the car and said nothing else for the drive back across the city, and his driver, a careful man who had worked for him for 9 years, did not attempt to fill the silence. By the time he returned to the Hansung Grand, the party was still in full swing. He walked back to the terrace. The crowd parted again. He crossed to where Soa stood with a group of her father's colleagues, and he waited until the conversation reached a natural pause. And then he said quietly and without drama, I need to end tonight early. I need to speak with your father tomorrow morning. Soa looked at him. She was a perceptive woman. She could see something had changed. He could tell she could see it. But she also knew, in the way people who dealt with him knew, that asking right now would not produce anything useful. She nodded. I'll let him know. Tae-jin looked around the terrace. The flowers, the crystal, the 200 people eating and laughing and watching each other, and said, clearly enough that the people immediately around them could hear, I'm ending the evening. Please give my apologies to the guests. He left. Not quietly, not through a side entrance or a private corridor. He walked straight through the middle of the party toward the main exit, and as he moved, conversation stopped and heads turned, and the murmur that rippled in his wake carried a frequency that everyone in that room, politicians, executives, rivals, allies, recognized as something significant occurring. By the time he reached the elevator, the terrace behind him had gone noticeably quieter, and Soa was standing at the center of it, looking at his retreating back with an expression that carried something the party's carefully maintained surface couldn't quite absorb. In the car, on the way back to his own building, he stared out the window at the city he ran and thought about a 24-year-old woman standing in front of 2 lawyers with a document telling her that the man she'd married had decided she wasn't worth the trouble. He thought about 10 years. He thought about 2 boys walking on a sidewalk with their hands in their jacket pockets. His phone buzzed. A message from his security director. Party departure confirmed. Guests departing. Chairman Min's office requests morning meeting. He didn't respond. He pulled up the photograph again. He looked at it for a long time. Not the way he usually studied surveillance images, as data to be analyzed and filed, but in the way a man looks at something he understands he has no right to and can't stop looking at anyway. Amara's face, the exhaustion in it, the grocery bag cutting into her shoulder. The boys. The boys. He put the phone face down on the seat. Back at his building, he went directly to his private office on the 41st floor. Not his corporate suite, but the smaller room behind it that no one entered without explicit invitation. The one that contained the filing cabinet with the organizational records he kept separate from everything his digital infrastructure touched. He spent the next 3 hours going through 10 years of financial records, flagging every transfer, every legal payment, every signature he recognized from his father's files. By 2 a.m, he had a preliminary map of everyone who had been involved, directly or instrumentally, in what had been done to Amara. There were 11 names. 2 of them were currently sitting on his organization's senior advisory council. One of them was Han Do-yoon. Taejin sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he closed the files and turned off the desk lamp and sat in the dark. And the city beyond the windows went on being the city, lit and moving and entirely indifferent to the fact that the most feared man in it had just discovered that the empire he'd spent a decade building was constructed on a foundation of someone else's lie. In the morning, he would need to make decisions about the engagement, about the 11 names, about how to approach a woman who had every reason to hate him, who had raised 2 boys alone on the other side of the world for 10 years while believing he had thrown her away. But right now, in the dark, in the quiet office, 41 floors above a city that didn't know anything had changed, Kang Tae-jin let himself feel the full weight of what a single photograph had done to his entire life. He sat with it until he was done sitting with it. Then he pulled out his phone and opened a new message to his intelligence director. Full background, current address, current employment, school enrollment, everything. Tonight. He sent it. Then he set the phone down and waited, and the city burned outside the window. And somewhere across Seoul, in a quiet residential neighborhood he'd never visited, 2 boys were asleep in a life he had never known existed. And their mother lay awake in the dark, the way she had probably lain awake for 10 years, carrying everything alone, with no reason to believe that would ever change. She didn't know yet that a photograph had survived. She didn't know yet that the lie had limits. She didn't know yet that in 48 hours, everything she had built to protect herself and her sons was about to be tested in ways she hadn't prepared for. And neither did the 11 men whose names were currently written in red ink on a document sitting in a locked drawer on the 41st floor of a building they didn't know they should be afraid of. The intelligence report arrived at 4:47 in the morning. Taejin was still at his desk. He hadn't slept. The cold coffee from midnight sat untouched at the edge of the desk blotter, and the city beyond the window had gone through that particular shade of pre-dawn gray that belongs to no hour. Not night anymore, not yet morning, a color that exists specifically to remind you how long you've been awake. He opened the file on his secure tablet and read it without moving for 22 minutes. Amara Brooks, 34 years old, American citizen, currently holding a long-term resident visa under a category he didn't immediately recognize, which told him she'd had help navigating Korean immigration paperwork at some point, help that hadn't come from him. Employed as a registered nurse at a mid-sized general hospital in Seongbuk district, working the day shift rotation, 12-hour days, 4 days a week. Apartment, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building in a residential neighborhood that was clean and ordinary and entirely without distinction, which meant she had chosen it deliberately. The rent was manageable on a nurse's salary, if you were careful. If you didn't buy things you didn't need, if you ran the numbers every month the way people ran numbers when there wasn't margin for error. The twins were enrolled in a local international school. Their names were listed in the file as Micah Taejin Brooks and Noah Kang Brooks. He read those names twice. She had given them his name, both of them. Even after everything, even believing what she'd been made to believe, she had given his name to both of her sons. And he sat with that for a moment in the gray pre-dawn silence, the way you sit with something that has the capacity to unmake you if you let it in too fast. He didn't let it in too fast. He closed the file. He stood up and went to the window and looked at the city for a while, and then he went to the private bathroom off the office and ran cold water over his face and looked at himself in the mirror with the particular honesty that comes at 5 a.m. when there's no performance left in you. He looked like what he was. A man who had been awake all night holding something very heavy. He went back to the desk. He drafted a short message to his intelligence director. Suspend all active surveillance on the residential address, effective immediately, no exceptions, and sent it before he had time to rationalize a reason not to. Then he pulled out a sheet of paper, handwritten, and began composing a message to Amara Brooks. It took him 6 drafts. The first 3 were too formal. The fourth was too apologetic in a way that felt manipulative even as he wrote it, which made him stop and stare at the ceiling for a while. The 5th was too short. The 6th said, "I know what my father did. I know what you were told. I know it wasn't true. I'm not asking for anything. I only want you to know that I know." He folded it and sealed it in a plain envelope with no return address and gave it to his most trusted personal courier with instructions for hand delivery, daytime hours only, no surveillance, no follow-up contact unless she initiated. Then he went home and slept for 4 hours. He woke to 17 missed messages. 14 were from various members of his organization's senior staff responding to the news that he'd left the engagement party without announcement. 2 were from Chairman Min Guangho's office requesting a meeting. 1 was from COA's personal number. He read COA's message first. "I assume we need to talk. I'm available Thursday. No urgency." It was a remarkably composed message from a woman who'd just watched her engagement evaporate in real time in front of 200 people, and Taijin noted the composure the way he noted everything, with respect and with attention. He called his senior staff director and told him to clear the week's external schedule. Then he called Han Do-yoon. The phone rang 4 times before the old man picked up. "Taijin, I need you in my office at 10. A pause. "Of course. Bring nothing. I have everything I need." He ended the call. Han Do-yoon arrived 7 minutes early, which was something he had always done, arriving before the appointed time as a way of demonstrating readiness, of showing that he was already oriented to the task before it began. He was dressed with his usual understated precision, gray slacks, a dark jacket, no tie. He looked like he had slept, which either meant he was accustomed to carrying weight without showing it, or he had made peace with something during the night that Taijin hadn't. Taijin didn't offer him a seat. He was standing when Do-yoon entered, and he stayed standing, which meant Do-yoon stood too, just inside the door, which shifted the room's geometry in a way that was not subtle. "The 11 names," Taijin said. "I want to know who initiated and who executed." Han Do-yoon looked at him steadily. "Your father initiated. I was informed after the fact. The legal arrangements were handled by Ro Chang-sik and Lim Byung-woo." Both men were currently sitting on his advisory council. "I already know their names. I want to know who else was paid. Who signed the immigration paperwork? Who arranged the relocation funds? Taijin, some of those individuals are no longer the living ones. I'll handle the rest separately." Do-yoon was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you move against the council now, before the engagement dissolution is officially announced, it will look like internal fracture. Your competitors will read it as instability. Then they'll read it wrong. They usually do, and you usually let them. This time it's different. This time you're—" Do-yoon stopped himself. "Emotional," Taijin said. "Flat. Say it." "I was going to say compromised." "No. You were going to say emotional, and you changed it because you know emotional is more accurate, and you thought it would make me angrier." He walked to the desk and sat down and looked at the man who had spent 40 years in his family's orbit. "You've been managing me since I was 19. I understand that. I'm telling you to stop." Do-yoon's jaw moved slightly. "I have your interest. You had my father's interest, which is not the same thing, and we both know it, and I'm done pretending we don't." Taijin opened the drawer and set the manila folder on the desk between them. "You kept this for 11 years. You sat across from me for 11 years knowing what was in it, and you said nothing." Do-yoon looked at the folder. He didn't reach for it. "Yes." "Why?" It wasn't asked with heat. It was asked the way a surgeon asks a question before cutting, clinically, because the answer is diagnostic, because it tells you what you're actually dealing with. Do-yoon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because your father made the organization what it is. And I still believe, that the stability of what he built was worth protecting. That some personal costs were She was 24 years old. Taejin's voice didn't change volume, didn't change temperature. She was pregnant. She was in a country where she didn't speak the language fluently, and she had no one. And two men in suits walked into a room with her and told her I'd thrown her away, and you knew, and you said nothing. Doyeon said nothing. "Get out of my building," Taejin said. "You'll receive formal separation papers from legal by end of week. Your pension remains intact. Don't contact me until I contact you." The old man stood there for a moment, not arguing, not apologizing, just absorbing the sentence the way older men absorbed irreversible things. And then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a sound that was entirely ordinary and felt like nothing of the kind. Taejin sat alone at the office for a few minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called Ro Chung-sik. That conversation lasted less than 4 minutes and ended with Ro understanding, with complete clarity and without any room for misinterpretation, that his position on the advisory council had been permanently vacated and that any attempt to publicly dispute the terms of his departure would precipitate a comprehensive audit of every financial transaction he had personally authorized over the past decade. Ro said very little during the call. Taejin noted that as well. The call to Lim Byung-woo went nearly identically. By noon, 2 seats on his advisory council were empty, and 3 of the remaining 9 members had sent messages to his assistant asking to schedule check-in meetings at Taejin's earliest convenience. He instructed his assistant to schedule all 3 for the same time slot on the same day, which would make clear to each of them individually that they were not the only one being seen, and which would ensure that none of them had the opportunity to coordinate a narrative before speaking with him. He had spent his entire adult life understanding how rooms full of dangerous people worked. The difference was that for the first time in his life, he was dismantling one of those rooms from the inside. Amara's reply came 9 days later. 9 days of silence so complete that Taejin had begun to believe she'd thrown the letter away without reading it, or had read it and decided the only sane response was no response at all. He hadn't sent a follow-up. He had promised himself he wouldn't, and the promise had cost him something every morning for 9 days, but he had kept it. The reply was handwritten, no envelope return address. 2 sentences. "I don't want to meet you. Don't send anything else." He wrote back the same day. "I understand. I found my father's files. I know exactly what happened. I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking for 18 minutes. 4 more days of silence. Then, Daeyeon Laundromat, Songbuk-dong. Saturday, 10 a.m. No staff, no security. Alone. He arrived 12 minutes early and sat in a plastic chair near the window and waited. The laundromat was small and perpetually warm, the way places full of running machines were always warm, and it smelled like detergent and clean heat. There were 4 other customers when he arrived. A woman folding a sheet, 2 college students sharing earbuds over a dryer, an elderly man reading a newspaper. And they cleared out gradually until by 5 minutes to 10, the room contained only Tae-jan and the sounds of 3 machines running their cycles. He heard her footsteps before the door opened. Amara walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. 10 years had changed her the way work changed people, not in any way that diminished her, but with the weight of sustained effort written into her posture, her eyes, the precise economy with which she moved. She was wearing scrubs under a winter coat, which meant she'd come directly from somewhere or was going somewhere directly after, which meant she had not carved out a special window for this. She had slotted it between the other demands of her actual life, which told him exactly where this meeting ranked on her list of priorities. Her expression when she saw him was not warm and it was not cold. It was the expression of a person who had decided to complete a necessary task with as little emotional expenditure as possible. She sat down across from him without shaking his hand. She set a folder on the machine beside her chair. "You have 18 minutes, she said. Her English was unchanged, flat Midwestern vowels unhurried with the particular clarity of someone who chose their words because they meant them. "I know what happened," he said. "All of it. I have the original documents." "I know you have them. You said that in the letter." She looked at him directly. "What do you want?" "To tell you that I didn't know." "You said that too." "I wanted to tell you in person." She looked at him for a moment. Not softening, not hardening, just looking. "Okay, you've told me." "Amara, don't." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Don't say my name like we're picking up from somewhere. We're not picking up from somewhere. You have 16 minutes. He absorbed that. Absorbed it the way you absorbed something that was accurate and that you had earned. The boys, he said. Something moved in her face. Fast, carefully controlled, but visible to anyone who knew what to look for. No. I'm not asking for... I said no. She leaned forward slightly. I don't care what files you found. I don't care what you didn't know. Those are my sons. They have a life. They have a school and friends and a routine and a mother who has spent 10 years building something stable for them. And you don't get to walk into that because you found some paperwork. They're my sons too, biologically. The word landed with surgical precision. That's all you are to them right now, a biological fact they don't know about. The silence between them held the weight of both those sentences. I'm not asking for access, Tejan said carefully. I'm asking what it would take for you to consider telling them the truth. On your terms. Your timeline. I follow whatever rules you set. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the folder beside her and pulled out a document. Several pages, handwritten, the handwriting precise and organized, the kind of handwriting produced by someone who had been composing this document in their head for longer than the paper suggested. She set it on the machine between them. Those are my conditions, she said. All of them. Non-negotiable. He picked up the pages and read them. No contact with the twins without her explicit written authorization for each specific instance. No unannounced appearances at any location associated with her family. Weekly investigation reports on the full scope of the conspiracy and everyone involved, delivered to her directly, not through intermediaries. Cancel the engagement to Minsoa within 14 days, publicly, and with a formal statement that made no reference to her or the twins. Remove all active surveillance within a half-kilometer radius of their home. No exceptions. No conditions attached to any of these conditions. If any single rule was violated, she and the boys would disappear. She did not elaborate on what disappear meant, and she didn't need to. This isn't a negotiation, she said. You agree to all of it, or you leave, and we're done. He looked up from the pages. How long have you been writing this? Since the second letter. She met his eyes without blinking. I spent 4 days deciding whether to respond at all. I spent another 4 deciding if 18 minutes was worth the risk. I spent the last day writing what it would take for me to consider, not agree, letting you near my children's lives. If you think any of those conditions are unreasonable, say so now. They're not unreasonable. Then sign at the bottom. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket. He always carried one, a habit so old it was reflex, and signed his name at the bottom of the last page. His actual signature, the one on legal documents, not the abbreviated version he used for routine correspondence. He slid the pages back across to her. She looked at the signature for a moment. Then she picked up the pages and put them back in the folder and stood up. 14 days on the engagement, she said. I'll have it done in 7. She nodded once, not in gratitude and acknowledgement, and walked toward the door. She was halfway there when she stopped. She didn't turn fully around. Your sons are healthy. They're smart. They're good kids. A pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. I just thought you should know that. She left. Tejan sat in the plastic chair in the warm, humming laundromat and looked at the door for a while after it closed. Then he sat forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked and looked at the floor instead, at the worn linoleum with its faint pattern, and he breathed carefully for a moment the way you breathed when something had just shifted in your chest and you needed to be sure everything was still working correctly. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out into the cold. He called Seoa from the car. She answered on the second ring. Kong Tai Jin. I need to meet today, not at my office and not at yours, somewhere neutral. A brief silence. There's a coffee shop near Gyeongbokgung. I'll send you the address. Another pause. Is this what I think it is? Yes. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was completely even. I'll be there at 2. She was already seated when he arrived, yet. A corner table, her coat folded over the chair beside her, a half-finished Americano in front of her, a tablet she had been working on when he walked in, and that she closed without hurrying when she saw him. She was composed in the way people were composed when they had already run the scenario in their head and arrived at a conclusion before the conversation began. He sat across from her. He didn't order anything. "I'm ending the engagement," he said. "I'll issue a public statement by end of week. The language will be about mutual agreement, no details, no reason given, nothing that reflects on your reputation or your father's business position." Seoa looked at him. "Is it the American woman?" The directness of it surprised him, which was unusual. Very few things surprised him. "Yes." She nodded slowly. Not wounded. Thinking. "I suspected there was someone. Not who or the circumstances, but something in your behavior these past months suggested a prior claim on something." She turned her coffee cup slightly. "The boys in the photograph." He went still. "What photograph?" "My father's security team has been running intelligence on your affiliates for 2 months. Standard corporate surveillance, the kind he does with all significant business partnerships. They flagged an unusual pull on your intelligence director's external network last week. I saw the summary." She met his eyes. "I'm telling you because you need to know, and because I'm not my father." The temperature in his chest dropped several degrees. "What exactly did they flag?" "A residential address in Seongbuk. 2 children. A woman." She paused. "My father doesn't have names yet, but he's the kind of man who gets names eventually, and he's not going to be pleased about the engagement ending." Taejin understood what she was telling him in the space below the words. Her father was already in motion, and the engagement's dissolution was going to accelerate something that was already being built. "How much time do I have?" he said. Sua picked up her coffee. "Less than you'd like." She set it down. "My father believes that humiliation is the most effective form of retaliation. He won't come at you through business. You're stronger there than he is. He'll come at whatever you care about." She looked at him steadily. "He just doesn't know yet what that is." Taejin was quiet for a moment. "If he finds out, he'll find out." Her voice was flat with the particular certainty of someone describing the weather. "He always finds out. The question is whether you've moved the people you need to protect before he does." He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a business arrangement or a scheduled obligation, but as a person sitting across from him who was choosing to give him information she was under no obligation to provide, at potential cost to her own relationship with her father. "Why are you telling me this?" Seoa held his gaze. "Because whoever she is, she has 2 children. And whatever my father's grievance is with you, children are not a legitimate target." She paused. "Some things are, and some things aren't." Taejin drove directly from the coffee shop to his security director's office, and he did not use the phone for any of it because he no longer trusted the security of any channel he hadn't personally audited in the past 48 hours, and the audits hadn't happened yet. He walked in unannounced and closed the door and spent 40 minutes restructuring every external surveillance protocol associated with Amar's address, her workplace, and the twins' school, not increasing it, not the way his instinct was screaming at him to do, but making it invisible, removing every digital trace that connected his organization's intelligence network to those locations, building instead a parallel monitoring structure that ran through 3 offshore contractors with no direct connection to the Kang name. He was protecting her from the machinery he himself had put in motion. The irony was not lost on him. By 8 that evening, he had identified the specific surveillance contractor Chairman Mean's team was using, traced the data pathway back through 2 intermediary firms, and confirmed that the residential address had been logged but not yet fully processed, which meant Min's team had the location, but not yet the names, not yet the school enrollment records, not yet the detail that would make the information weaponizable. He had perhaps 72 hours before that changed. He wrote a message to Amara, short, factual, no emotional content. "There is a development you need to be aware of. I need to tell you in person. Tomorrow morning. Your choice of location." He sent it. He sat in his car outside the security building and watched the city go dark, and thought about all the things he had set in motion in the past 2 weeks. The dismissed advisors, the restructured council, the ended engagement, the contracts he'd signed in a warm laundromat with a pen he always carried, and understood that he had now crossed a threshold he had not fully appreciated while he was crossing it. He had not just discovered a truth, he had acted on it. He had moved pieces. He had made himself visible in ways that powerful men noticed, and one powerful man in particular had already noticed, and was already, quietly, building something designed to destroy the people Tae-jin had only just found. His phone buzzed. Amara's reply. Tomorrow. Same laundromat. 7 a.m. Make it fast. He read the message twice. Then he set the phone on the passenger seat and started the car. And as he pulled into the street, he understood with complete clarity that the decisions he made in the next 72 hours would determine whether everything he had signed his name to in that laundromat meant anything at all, or whether the same machinery that had taken Amara from him once was going to be used by a different man to finish the job. He drove through the city with both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, eyes forward, and the cold dark pouring through the windshield like it was trying to get inside him. He didn't let it. He was at the laundromat at 6:43. The city was doing that thing it did in early winter mornings, holding its breath between darkness and light, the streets not yet committed to the day, the air carrying the particular sharpness of temperatures that hadn't decided how cold they intended to get. Tae-jin had parked 2 blocks away and walked, not from habit, but from calculation. If Min Guangho's surveillance contractors had managed to accelerate their timeline overnight, he didn't want a vehicle registered to any entity connected to his name sitting outside a location he was about to bring Amara into. He bought 2 coffees from a convenience store on the corner. He didn't know how she took hers. He realized, standing at the counter waiting for the cups, that he had never known. They had been young and careless and in love in the way people were when they believed time was a resource rather than a constraint, and the small domestic details had never settled into permanence before everything was taken from them. He got both black and a handful of sugar packets and a small container of creamer and put them in a bag and walked to the laundromat and sat down in the same plastic chair as before. She arrived at 7 exactly. She was in her coat again, different scrubs underneath, and she looked like she had slept less than she needed, which was a look he was beginning to understand was simply her baseline, not the result of any single bad night, but the accumulated texture of years of not enough. She saw the bag on the machine beside him and stopped for one beat, then sat down and looked at it without touching it. "There's coffee," he said. "I didn't know how you take it." She reached into the bag. She took the black coffee. She didn't say anything. "Min Guangho's team has your residential address," he said. He didn't ease into it. There was no version of this information that was easier with a longer runway. "They don't have names yet. As of last night, they had the location and a physical description. Adult female, 2 male children. Probably 72 hours before they closed the gap." Amara held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at him. Her face did something controlled and specific. Not panic, nothing close to panic, but a rapid internal recalibration, the kind that happened behind the eyes of people who had spent years being the only person available to solve problems that weren't supposed to be theirs. "How?" she said. "Standard corporate surveillance. Min's team has been running intelligence on my affiliates for months. They flagged an unusual pull on my intelligence network and traced it back to the Seongbuk address." He paused. "Seoa told me. She came to me voluntarily. His daughter warned you." "Yes." A silence. Amara looked at the window, at the gray morning outside it, and then back at him. "What does he want to do with it?" "Humiliate me. His preferred method is exposure. Journalists, leaked documents, public narrative. He'll frame it as a scandal. Mafia King's secret foreign family, hidden children, the engagement he destroyed his daughter over." He kept his voice level because she needed information right now, not emotion. "The target isn't you specifically. The target is me. You and the boys are the mechanism." She set the coffee down on the machine. She put her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the floor for a moment. And he watched the muscles in her jaw work, just slightly, the way they worked when someone was applying significant internal pressure to something they couldn't allow to move. "The boys don't know," she said. It wasn't directed at him. It was said the way people said things they were reminding themselves of, the way you inventoried what was true before deciding what to do about it. "I know. Micah is 13 weeks away from a school debate championship he's been preparing for since September." She looked up. "Noah has a best friend whose birthday party is in 6 days. They have a life, Tae-jin. They have an actual life, and it is not organized around you or your problems or the fallout from decisions your father made before they were born. I understand that. Do you? Not a question, an assessment. Yes. He held her gaze. That's why I'm here at 7 in the morning instead of sending someone else. That's why I'm telling you first instead of managing it from my end and hoping it doesn't reach you. She was quiet for a long moment. The machines ran around them. Someone had left a load in the machine nearest the door, and it was in its final spin cycle, the drum turning with a sound like a distant engine, rhythmic and indifferent. What are my options? She said. Relocation. I can have a fully secured residence prepared in 48 hours, different district, no connection to your current address or employer, new enrollment for the boys under a parallel documentation pathway. Your hospital employment can be suspended with a covered leave arrangement if you choose. He paused. Or we move faster than Min does. I have enough on his organization's financial conduct to make his surveillance operation a secondary concern very quickly. But that requires me to accelerate the investigation timeline, which means publicly surfacing documents that will have significant consequences for a number of people simultaneously, and it will make considerable noise. Noise that lands on my sons. Potentially, initially, before the narrative stabilizes. Amara picked the coffee back up. She looked at it rather than at him. You've been planning this already. I've been preparing options. I haven't moved on any of them. Why not? Because I signed a contract in this room that says I don't make decisions about your life without your input. I'm honoring that. She looked at him then, directly, in the way she'd looked at him across the laundromat table the first time, without warmth or coldness, but with that precise diagnostic attention that he was beginning to understand was simply who she was now. What a decade of raising 2 sons alone in a foreign country had refined her into. Someone who looked at situations and people without sentiment and saw exactly what was there. Give me 24 hours, she said. You have it. She stood up. She took the coffee with her this time. At the door she stopped, and without turning around she said, if you move on anything before I contact you, we're done, and I mean it. I know, he said. She left. He sat in the laundromat for another 12 minutes. He drank his coffee. He thought about 72 hours and what could be built inside them and what could be lost. Then his phone rang. The number was his intelligence director's secondary line, the one used only for time-sensitive escalations, never for routine reporting. Taejin picked up immediately. Tell me, we have a problem. His director's voice was controlled but carrying something underneath it, a compression that came from someone who had identified a serious threat and was managing the delivery carefully. The Min surveillance trace. I ran it back further than last night's audit. There's a secondary data pathway we missed in the initial sweep. It wasn't going through the Seongbuk address. Taejin went still. What was it going through? A half-second pause. The hospital. The word landed in his chest like something structural giving way. Her workplace. Yes, sir. Her employee record was accessed 48 hours ago through a third-party healthcare data broker. Name, photograph, shift schedule, department assignment, supervisor contact. They have her full identity. They've had it since Tuesday. Tuesday? 2 days ago. Before the laundromat meeting. Before Soa's warning. Before everything he had spent the last 18 hours restructuring. He was already standing. The boys. School enrollment records are accessed through a separate municipal database. As of this morning, that database hasn't been touched, but if they have her full identity and place of employment, the school records are an hour away at most. He was moving toward the door. Pull everything. Every contractor, every data pathway, every point of access. I want a full map of what they have and when they got it within the next 40 minutes. There's one more thing. Another pause, this one longer. And in the space of it, Taejin understood from the quality of the silence alone that what was coming was worse than what had just been said. The secondary data pathway. I traced the authorization signature on the broker access request. Whose was it? Park Jun-seo. Taejin stopped walking. He was standing on the sidewalk outside the laundromat, and the morning was going gray around him. And a woman walked past with a child's hand in hers, and he stood completely still while that name rearranged every structure inside his understanding of the last 2 weeks. Park Jun-seo was 31 years old. He had been with Taejin's organization for 4 years, promoted to internal security analysis 18 months ago, and given access to the intelligence director's operational network 8 months after that. He was meticulous, reliable, precise in his reporting, and he had been personally vetted by Taejin's own process. Not Han Do-yoon's, not his father's, his own. He was one of 7 people on the planet with access to the specific network pull that had been flagged in Tuesday's data request. He was also, Taejin now recalled with the specific cold clarity of a man running backward through a series of events he had misread, the nephew of Lim Byung-woo, one of the 2 advisory council members he had dismissed 3 days ago. When did Jun Seo access the broker? Taejin said, 6 hours after Lim Byung-woo's termination meeting. Taejin stood on the sidewalk and felt the full geometry of it lock into place around him. Lim Byung-woo, dismissed and facing financial audit, had gone to his nephew within 6 hours. His nephew, with access to Taejin's own intelligence infrastructure, had used it not to protect Taejin, but to sell to the only buyer immediately available. And Chairman Min Gwang-ho, who had already been building a file on Taejin's network, and who had every reason to accelerate his timeline now that the engagement was officially ending, had been an extremely willing buyer. The breach hadn't come from outside. It had come from the restructuring, from his own moves. The people he had dismissed had lit a fuse on the way out. He called Amara. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I just got home. They have more than an address. He kept his voice flat and fast and without any element that would require her to spend energy on his emotional state. They accessed your hospital employment record 48 hours ago. Full identity confirmed. Photograph, shift schedule. A beat. The school records are probably next. I'd estimate 2 to 4 hours. The silence on her end lasted approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, he heard her breathe in once, slowly, and release it, and the sound of that breath, the discipline it contained, the effort of keeping the response inside the body and not in the voice, was one of the hardest things he had listened to in recent memory. My boys are at school right now, she said. I know. Tell me what you need from me. Nothing yet. I'm handling the breach. I need you to stay calm and available, and not make any moves until I tell you the threat assessment has changed. 30 minutes. 20, she said, and ended the call. He was in his car within 90 seconds, calling his security director while driving, building the response architecture in real time. Surveillance contractors to shadow both boys at school from a distance with no direct contact, no uniforms, nothing that would be visible to either the children or the school administration. A parallel team dispatched to the hospital to establish a quiet perimeter without alarming her colleagues. A legal contact activated to begin expedited preparation of suppression filings against the data broker, and a direct call to the one person in Min Gwang-ho's orbit who had already demonstrated she was willing to act against her own family's interests. Soa answered immediately. I wondered how long. He has her identity, employment record, photograph, the works. He got it through a broker access request that went through my own network. A pause. I need to know his timeline, specifically his media contacts, who he uses and what their standard publication lead time is. A silence on her end. When she spoke, her voice had shifted, still composed, but with something under it that wasn't quite cold. Something closer to the specific fury of someone who had already made a decision and was now being shown proof that the decision was correct. He met with 2 journalists last night, one from a national entertainment desk, one from a political affairs digital outlet. Another pause. Taejin. He has photographs, not just the employment record, physical photographs. He showed them to me this morning without understanding that I would... She stopped herself. He's planning to publish by end of week. End of week. 3 days. The photographs, he said. How recent? Within the last week. Street level. The woman and both boys. A pause. One of them appears to be taken near the school. He said nothing for a moment. The car moved through the morning traffic, and the city continued to be the city, and somewhere across Seongbuk, 2 10-year-old boys were sitting in classrooms not knowing that a man they'd never met had paid someone to photograph them near their school. I need everything he showed you, Taejin said. Every document, every image, every journalist contact. I need it today. I know. She paused. There's something else. He made a comment this morning about the older boy, about his appearance, The way he looks. Her voice flattened further. He said the photographs would be more impactful because of it, because of how the contrast would read in a headline. The car stopped at a red light. Taejin's hands on the wheel were completely still. She meant that Micah was visibly black, that his appearance, his identity, his face, was being calculated as a tool for maximum public impact, a way to frame the story with the most visceral and damaging visual contrast possible, to make a headline that would hurt not just Amara and Taejin, but the boy himself, in ways that a 10-year-old should never have to absorb. "Send me everything," Taejin said. "Now." He drove. He drove, and his mind was moving at a speed and temperature that he recognized from the few genuinely dangerous moments of his life. Not the managed danger of organizational politics, not the calculated risk of business confrontation, but the specific gear that engaged when something fundamental was actually at stake, when the cost of getting it wrong was not professional or financial, but human, irreversible, the kind that left marks on people that no amount of subsequent correction could fully erase. He had spent 2 weeks believing that the primary threat to his sons was the past. His father's decisions, the conspiracy of 11 men, the decade-long infrastructure of a lie. He had been dismantling that past with the methodical precision of someone who believed that if you removed enough structural damage, what remained would be stable. He had not understood, until this moment, that the past was not the primary threat. He was. His moves, his dismissals, his accelerated timeline. Every action he had taken in the name of building something better had created the exact conditions that put his sons in the frame of a photographer hired by a man who intended to use their faces as weapons. He parked outside his building and sat in the car for 1 full minute. He gave himself 60 seconds, not to feel it fully, because there wasn't time for that, but to acknowledge its full weight before he set it down somewhere accessible and went back to work. Then he got out of the car and went inside. By midday, he had a complete map of Chairman Min's media operation. Seoa had delivered everything. Not as digital files, but in person, arriving at his building's private entrance with a plain envelope and a face that carried the controlled expression of someone who had spent a morning making an irrevocable choice and was not second-guessing it. She handed him the envelope. She said, "My father is going to know it was me." She didn't say it as complaint or as bid for sympathy. She said it the way you stated a consequence you had accepted. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for protection." She met his eyes. "I'm asking you to make sure it's worth it. It will be." She nodded once and left. Inside the envelope were 6 photographs, 3 journalist contact sheets with publication timelines, a summary of the data broker transaction that confirmed Park Junseo as the access point, and a handwritten note in Min Guangho's handwriting, a memo to his own media consultant that read, in part, "Focus on the children's appearances. It reads more powerfully. Make sure the school location is confirmed before we go to press." Taejin read the note once. He set it face down on the desk. He called his legal team and his investigative finance director into the same room at the same time, which was unusual enough that both men arrived with the particular alertness of people who understood that unusual configurations meant significant events. He laid out what he had. He told them what he needed. He gave them specific targets, specific timelines, and specific instructions about what the output needed to look like and where it needed to go. He was not, he told them, interested in managing this quietly. He was interested in making it impossible to ignore. By 3 in the afternoon, 6 independent journalists, not Min's journalists with established records for financial corruption reporting who had been on Taejin's organization's peripheral contact list for years without ever being directly engaged, received identical encrypted packages containing 3 years of Chairman Min Guangho's financial records, documentation of 7 instances of regulatory violation in the pharmaceutical division, evidence of the data broker transaction, including the internal memo about using children's appearances for headline impact, and a single cover note that said, simply, "You did not receive this from me. Publish what you can verify." He sent the packages and sat back and looked at the ceiling. The problem with fighting the right way, he understood now in a way he hadn't fully understood before, was that fighting the right way was slower. Suppression filings, journalist packages, legal preparation, these were not immediate. These were not the kind of response that landed between morning and evening. Min Guangho's publication timeline was 3 days. Taejin's response, moving through legitimate channels, needed 48 hours minimum to produce anything with real teeth, which left a gap. And inside that gap, somewhere in Seongbuk, two boys were going to come home from school and eat dinner and do homework and go to sleep without knowing that their faces had been photographed outside their school by a man who wanted to use them to hurt their father. He picked up his phone and opened a message to Amara. He wrote, "The threat is real and accelerating. Publication timeline is 72 hours. I have countermeasures deployed, but there is a gap. You need to know that before tomorrow." He sent it. Then he wrote a second message. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not saying it to ask for anything. I'm saying it because you deserve to know what I've understood today." He stopped. He looked at the words, then he continued. "This happened because of my moves. My dismissals accelerated his timeline. He used someone I missed in my own organization. I thought I was protecting you, and I made it worse. And I'm telling you that directly because you are the only person in this situation who has never once lied to me, and you deserve the same in return." He sent that one too. He sat in the silence of his office for a moment. Then Amara's reply arrived. It was 3 words. "I know. Keep going." He read those 3 words and felt something shift in him that wasn't relief and wasn't gratitude and wasn't any of the clean emotions. It was closer to the sensation of being handed something very heavy by someone who understood the weight of it and had decided to share it anyway. Not because the weight was reduced by sharing, but because they had determined that you were capable of carrying your portion. He picked up the phone. He called his intelligence director and said, "I need you to find Park Junseo tonight. We have a location. I want him in a room with me in 2 hours." "Yes, sir." He hung up. He stood up. He went to the window and looked at the city going orange in the late afternoon light, all those buildings and streets and lives moving through the early dark of winter. And he thought about Micah and Noah sitting in their apartment in Seongbuk right now, probably doing homework, probably arguing about something ordinary, probably completely unaware that the world they knew was 3 days away from being detonated from underneath them by a man who had decided their faces were a useful instrument. He thought about what Amara had said in the laundromat the first time. They have a life. They have an actual life. He thought about the school debate championship. 13 weeks. A boy who had been preparing since September. He thought about what it meant to be responsible for something, not in the abstract, not in the organizational sense where responsibility was a delegated structure with clear lines of authority and accountability mechanisms, but in the raw, personal, non-transferable sense. The sense where there was no one else to call, where the only person standing between what was wrong and what needed to be made right was the one looking at the city from a 41st floor window. 2 hours later, Park Junseo sat in a chair in a basement-level room in one of Taejin's secondary properties, and the young man's composure, which had apparently been significant when Taejin's team collected him, had done what composure did under sustained pressure from people who were very good at applying it. It had thinned in specific places, the places where the real structure was weakest, and what showed through in those places was not defiance, but something younger and more frightened than defiance. Taejin sat across from him without a desk between them. No table. Just 2 chairs and the bare overhead light and the sound of the building's ventilation system doing its work. "Your uncle called you the evening of his dismissal," Taejin said. Not a question. Junseo's eyes moved to the floor. "Yes." "And you accessed the healthcare broker database within 6 hours?" "Yes." "You've worked for me for 4 years. Taejin's voice was the same one he'd used with Han Do-yoon, flat, diagnostic, without heat. "In those 4 years, did I ever give you a reason to believe I was someone who could be betrayed safely?" Junseo said nothing. "Answer the question." "No." The word came out compressed, barely. "Then explain the calculation to me." Taejin leaned forward slightly. "Your uncle is terminated with his pension intact. Full confidentiality arrangements, no public exposure. You have a secure position, career advancement, access. What did Min Guangho offer you that was worth destroying all of that?" A long silence. Then quietly, "He said my uncle was going to lose everything in your audit. He said the only way to stop it was to give him something he could use to distract you." Taejin absorbed this. He absorbed the specific shape of it, the fear that had been used as leverage, the manipulation dressed as protection, The uncle who had taken a dismissal without argument in the room and then immediately weaponized his nephew from the outside. A more elegant piece of work than he had credited Min Guangho with. "The photographs," Taejin said. "Near the school." Junseo's head came up. "I didn't take those. I only provided the residential address and the hospital employment data. The photographs," he stopped, "were taken by someone else. Min's own team. I didn't know they were going to photograph the children. I didn't know that was—" He stopped again. His hands in his lap were pressing against each other, the pressure visible in the whitened knuckles. Taejin looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up. "You're going to write a full account of every communication between yourself and Min Guangho's representatives. Every contact, every instruction, every piece of data you provided, and when, signed and witnessed. Tonight. And then I'll decide what to do with you." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. "The data you provided, the hospital record, the residential address. How many people in Min's organization received copies?" Junseo's jaw worked. "I sent it to one contact. I don't know how they distributed it internally. But it's in their system." "Yes." Taejin opened the door. "Write the account." He went back upstairs. He went back to the window. The city was dark now, fully committed to the evening, and across it somewhere a man named Min Guangho was sitting in his own building with a file that contained Amar's face and his son's faces and a publication date 3 days from now. And the 48 hours between tonight and the moment Taejin's countermeasures would carry any real weight had just acquired a weight and texture and temperature that no amount of operational precision could entirely neutralize. He had one remaining move that could close the gap. It was not a move he had taken seriously before tonight. It required him to do something that the architecture of his entire adult life had been built specifically to avoid. It required him to ask for something publicly, openly, without leverage, and without the ability to manage the outcome. He picked up the phone. He called Amara. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. "Talk," she said. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And after I tell you, I need to ask you for something. You're allowed to say no. I want you to know that before I say either thing." A pause. "Go ahead." "The countermeasures I've deployed need 48 hours to land. Min's publication window is 72. There's a 24-hour gap where the boys are potentially visible, regardless of what I do on my end." He stopped. Then, "I think you need to tell them, tonight, before anyone else does." The silence on her end was the longest she had ever given him. "Tell them what?" she said, and her voice had gone very quiet, very still, the kind of still that came just before something moved. "Tell them their father is alive," he said. "Tell them it wasn't what they've been told. Tell them before the world tells them something worse, in a way you can't control." He heard her breathe. "I'm not asking to be there," he said quickly. "I'm not asking to be part of it. I'm asking you to protect them from hearing it first in a headline. That's all." Another long silence. Then Amara said, in a voice that was carrying something enormous and carrying it carefully, "I've been thinking about telling them for 2 weeks." He said nothing. "I've been thinking about it since your first letter." A pause. "Micah is going to—" She stopped, started again. "Noah will probably be okay. Noah processes things by talking. But Micah—" Another stop. "Micah is going to be very angry. Not at you specifically, at the situation, at what was done. He carries things, that boy. He has since he was small. He carries things and he doesn't put them down easily." "He sounds like me," Taejin said. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Smaller, more specific. "Yes," Amar said. "He does." A breath. "I'll tell them tonight." He closed his eyes for just a moment. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing it for you." Her voice was steady. "I'm doing it because my sons deserve to know the truth before the world makes it ugly, and because I have spent 10 years telling them that the truth is always better than the story someone else tells about you." A pause. "I have to go. They'll be home in 20 minutes." "I know." "Taejin." She said his name for the first time since the laundromat. Not with warmth, not coldly, simply. The way you said the name of a person you were beginning to accept was actually present in your life. "Don't let anything happen to my boys." "I won't," he said. And he meant it with the specific weight of a man who understood that some promises were not statements of intention, but declarations of what you were now required to become. She ended the call. He stood at the window in the dark office, and the city burned below him. And somewhere in a third-floor apartment in Seongbuk, a woman was setting down her phone and looking at the door and waiting for the sound of two boys coming home, knowing that the next hour of their lives was going to change the shape of everything that came after it. And there was nothing he could do from here to make that easier. And the understanding of that, the complete and unambiguous understanding of what it meant to be responsible for something you could not control, was the most uncomfortable thing Kang Tae-jin had ever been required to sit with. He sat with it. He didn't look away from it. And somewhere beneath the controlled surface of the man who ran the most feared criminal organization in Korea, something that had been locked and managed and deliberately starved of oxygen for a very long time, finally began to do what locked things did when the structure around them changed. It began, quietly and irrevocably, to breathe. He didn't sleep. There was no version of that night that contained sleep. He sat at his desk and worked through it, monitoring channels, managing the journalist packages, tracking the suppression filing progress through his legal team, and waiting for the specific silence that would tell him something had broken in the wrong direction. His security director sent updates every 40 minutes. The surveillance shadow on the boys' school held clean. No unusual activity near Amara's building. Min Guangho's media contacts had gone quiet, which was either a good sign or the specific kind of quiet that preceded detonation. At 11:43, a message arrived from Amara. 2 sentences. I told them. Noah cried. Micah didn't say anything. He went to his room and closed the door. He counted. That was 4 sentences. He read them again. He wrote back, Thank you for telling me. Is there anything you need tonight? She didn't reply, which he took to mean she was handling it, which he took to mean he should let her handle it. He turned back to the work. By 4 in the morning, 2 of the 6 journalists who had received his packages had responded through encrypted channels requesting source verification on specific financial documents. He had his investigative director prepare the verification materials personally, without support staff, and deliver them through the same channel within the hour. The journalists were moving slowly, carefully, the way good journalists moved when they were building something they intended to survive scrutiny, but moving. At 6:15, his security director called rather than messaged. That was the protocol for things that couldn't wait for a text to be read. Min's media consultant made 3 calls in the last 40 minutes, his director said. 2 to publication contacts, 1 to a legal firm specializing in pre-publication clearance. He's moving up the timeline. Yes, sir. Our contact inside the clearance firm, passive only, she volunteers nothing. She confirms when asked. Confirmed a rush clearance request came in last night. They're asking for same-day turnaround. Tae-jin's hand tightened on the phone. Same-day turnaround meant today. Not end of week. Today. The photographs, he said. Confirmed in the package submitted for clearance? Confirmed, including the one near the school. He was already standing. Get the car. 5 minutes. He dressed in under 3 minutes. Dark suit, no tie, moving through his apartment with the specific efficiency of someone whose body had been trained over many years to convert from rest state to operational with minimal transition time. He was in the elevator before the suit jacket was fully settled on his shoulders. In the car before the security director had finished relaying the morning's secondary briefing. Moving through the city's early traffic before he had a clear plan, and not letting the absence of a clear plan slow him down. Because the alternative to moving without a complete plan was not moving at all. And not moving at all was no longer an option. He called Soa. She answered on the second ring. She sounded like she had been awake. I know, she said before he spoke. He moved it up. How much of what you gave me can be independently verified without you as the source? Everything except the internal memo. The memo is in his handwriting, and I'm the only person who can place it in his possession without going through channels he controls. A pause. If I testify to the memo, it's on record. There's no walking that back. He heard what was underneath that. I'm not asking you to do that. I know you're not. A beat. I'm telling you because I've already decided to. He was quiet for a moment. Seoa. He showed me that memo over breakfast, she said. Her voice was carrying something that wasn't grief, and wasn't rage, but shared a border with both of them. He was proud of it. He said it was the cleanest move he'd ever designed. He talked about the children's faces in those photographs like they were— She stopped. I have been my father's daughter for 34 years. I have made peace with many things about who he is. This is not something I'm making peace with. The legal exposure for you is manageable. My legal team has been briefed. Another pause. Tajin, stop trying to protect me from a choice I've already made. It wastes time. He absorbed that. Where are you? My office. I have a meeting with my attorney in 20 minutes and a prepared statement ready for the financial affairs desk at noon. A pause. The memo goes with the statement, my name on it. Your father will— Yes, she said simply. He will. The steadiness in her voice was not the steadiness of someone who hadn't considered the cost. It was the steadiness of someone who had considered it completely and continued anyway. Make it count. She ended the call. Tajin told his driver to change direction. New destination. Not his office building, not his security director's facility, but the private financial records storage facility in Mapo district, where his investigative team had been working through the night. He needed to be in the room where the documents were. He needed to see what they had and what gaps remained, and whether what Seoa was about to hand over publicly would close those gaps before Min's clearance came through. Traffic was building. The city was waking up in its ordinary way. Buses and delivery vehicles and commuters with their coffee, and Tae-jin sat in the back of the car watching the ordinary morning world move past the window and felt the particular pressure of a situation that existed in a completely different register from everything around it. The way it always felt when something genuinely consequential was in motion inside the ordinary texture of daily life. Invisible to everyone not inside it. His phone buzzed. His intelligence director. Park Junseo's written account completed and witnessed 0342 hours. Reviewing now. 3 items of note. He called back immediately. Tell me. First, Junseo confirms Min's team had the school location before the hospital data. They had independent surveillance already running. The data Junseo provided accelerated their timeline, but they were already closer than we assessed. A pause. Second, the contact Junseo passed data to is a man named Cha Won-ho, mid-level in Min's corporate security division. We have a location on Cha Won-ho. And third, a longer pause. Junseo says Min has a secondary media package, a backup. If the primary publication gets suppressed or delayed, there's a second outlet, smaller, international, outside Korean press jurisdiction. The photographs and identity information have already been transmitted to them. The car stopped at a light. Outside, 2 school children were crossing the street with backpacks, moving at the specific unhurried pace of children who had not yet understood that time had urgency. Tae-jin watched them cross. An international outlet, he said. Yes, sir. Junseo doesn't have the name. He only knows it exists. An international outlet outside Korean press jurisdiction meant his legal suppression filings were useless against it. It meant that even if everything he'd deployed in the domestic media landscape held, Min had a pressure release valve that could blow the story open from a direction Tae-jin's legal architecture didn't cover. He thought about Micah in his room with the door closed. He thought about what it meant for a 10-year-old boy to open a phone or a laptop and find his own face in an international headline. Find Cha Won-ho, he said. I want to know where he is, and I want to know it before 8 o'clock. Already moving. He hung up. The records facility was a converted commercial space, neutral, unmarked, the kind of location that could have been an accounting firm or a translation service, the kind that attracted no attention precisely because it was indistinguishable from the 30 other similarly sized businesses in the building. His investigative director met him in the main room, which had been converted over the past 2 weeks into something that resembled a war room. If war rooms ran on cold coffee and printed spreadsheets, documents organized across 3 long tables, color-coded by category, with a whiteboard on the far wall that mapped the financial timeline of Min Gwang-ho's regulatory violations across 7 years. Tae-jin walked through it. He read what was there. He asked specific questions and got specific answers, and by 7:15 he had a complete picture of what his 6 journalist packages contained and what was missing and what Seoa's memo would add. What it added was a chain of custody. Without the memo, the financial documents were compelling but attributable. Any competent legal team could argue that the data had been obtained through channels that compromised its credibility. The memo, in Min Guangho's own handwriting, with Seoa as the verifiable witness, established Min's direct personal involvement in the targeted harassment operation. It turned a financial corruption story into something more immediate, more personal, more difficult to spin. A story about a man who had looked at photographs of children and calculated their usefulness as headline impact. That was a story that moved faster than financial documents. That was a story editors didn't sit on. His phone rang at 7:48. Unknown number, which meant it was one of the secure lines his intelligence network used for contacts who couldn't use traceable channels. He answered, a voice he didn't recognize. "You don't know me. I work in Min Guangho's legal division. I've worked there for 6 years." A pause. "I saw the memo, the one about the children. I saw it last week, and I've been trying to decide what to do about it since then." Teijin kept his voice entirely neutral. "I'm listening." "The international outlet he's using. I know the name. I know the editor. I know the contact pathway his media consultant used to transmit the package." Another pause, shorter. "I want immunity from whatever's coming. I want it in writing, from you, in the next 30 minutes. Then I give you everything." "What's your name?" "In 30 minutes. I need something now, one piece, to confirm you're who you say you are." A very brief silence. "The international contact is a freelance journalist based in London. The package was transmitted Tuesday evening. It's sitting in an encrypted hold pending a publication trigger that Min's consultant sends personally." Tuesday evening, before the domestic timeline accelerated. Min had sent it before he moved up the domestic publication date. He'd built redundancy into this from the start. "Give me your direct line," Teijin said. "You'll have written confirmation within 20 minutes. He ended the call and immediately called his attorney and gave the instruction and spent the next 17 minutes in motion, moving through the records facility, dictating 2 parallel sets of instructions, one to his legal team and one to his intelligence director regarding a London-based freelance journalist, building the architecture to reach an editor in a time zone 7 hours behind Seoul before the publication trigger could be sent. The written immunity confirmation went out at 8:11. The source called back at 8:14 and gave him everything. By 9 o'clock, his attorney in London had made contact with the international outlet's editorial director through a mutual professional connection, had transmitted a pre-legal notice citing specific data protection violations in the transmission of photographs of minors without parental consent, had attached SOA's statement regarding the memo as documentary context, and had made explicit, calmly, professionally, with zero ambiguity, that the outlet's editorial decision would be scrutinized in detail and in public if they proceeded, and that the scrutinizing would not be gentle. Editors at legitimate international outlets, even ones who took aggressive stories, did not enjoy scrutiny. The editorial director called back at 9:37 and said the package was being held pending internal legal review. Held, not killed. Held. But held was enough. Held created time. At 10 o'clock, Seoa's statement went public. He watched it land from the records facility, his director pulling up the financial affairs outlet on a laptop, the timestamp appearing on screen, the headline building itself across the top of the page with the particular deliberateness of digital text that doesn't know it's changing things. The memo was reproduced in full. Seoa's name was on the byline as source. The financial documents followed in a structured appendix that his journalist contacts had spent the night verifying and organizing into a sequence that was nearly impossible to dismiss. Within 22 minutes, 3 other outlets had picked up the story. Within 40, Min Guangho's primary publication contact had gone silent. Within an hour, the legal clearance firm handling his rush request had withdrawn from the engagement, which his attorney confirmed through the passive internal contact, which meant the domestic publication pathway had just lost its legal cover. Teijin sat down for the first time since 4 in the morning. He sat in a chair at one of the document tables and put his hands flat on the surface and breathed in carefully and breathed out. His intelligence director appeared at his shoulder. "Min's made 3 calls in the last 20 minutes, 2 to his attorneys, 1 to a damage control consultant. He's pivoting to defense." "Yes, sir." "Pull the shadow teams from the school. Standard distance only. passive monitoring. No active perimeter. He paused. Tell the hospital team the same. Understood. His phone buzzed. A message from Amara. I'm seeing something in the news. Is it over? He wrote back. Not completely, but the immediate threat is contained. The boys should be safe today.
A pause, then. Micah read the news this morning before school. He saw Sioa's statement. He asked me if she was a good person. I told him I thought she was becoming one. Another pause. He said that was an interesting answer. Taejin read that twice. He thought about a 10-year-old boy reading a news statement before school, parsing it with the kind of careful attention that children with difficult inner lives developed as a survival skill, asking a question about moral complexity with the specific directness of someone who wanted a real answer and could tell the difference between one and a performance. He wrote back, Your son is very perceptive. Amara replied, Yes, he is. He also said, and I am telling you this only because you should know, that he wants to understand the full story, not pieces, the whole thing. He said if there are going to be strangers making decisions about his life, he wants to know why. Taejin looked at those words for a long moment.
Then his phone rang. Not a message. An actual call from a number he recognized immediately as Chairman Min Gwang-ho's personal line, a number he had never received a call from directly, had never expected to receive a call from, had always understood as existing in the category of things that remained at careful distance by mutual, unspoken understanding. He answered, Kang Taejin. The voice was the voice of a man in his 60s who had spent 4 decades building something large and was currently watching parts of it come loose, but who was still, underneath the situation's pressure, a man who had spent 4 decades building something large. The voice had weight. We should meet. No, Taejin said, a pause. You understand this isn't finished. I understand you believe that. My daughter has made a significant error in judgment. Whatever she told you, whatever she provided, she doesn't have complete information. There are dimensions to my business interests that she doesn't have visibility into, and what she's set in motion is going to have consequences she hasn't fully...
Chairman Mayan, Taejin kept his voice exactly flat. Your daughter made the decision she made because you showed her a memo about children's faces and called it your cleanest move. Whatever argument you're building right now, that's the foundation it's standing on. I'd think carefully about how far you want to build on that foundation in a conversation with me.
A silence. Longer than comfortable. Min was a man who used silence strategically, who had deployed it for decades across boardrooms and courtrooms and difficult conversations, and Taejin let the silence be what it was and didn't fill it. What do you want? Min said finally. From you, specifically, for you to withdraw. Every piece of media material, the international package, yes, I know about London, withdrawn by end of day. Every journalist contact your consultant made, a formal withdrawal of the story package. No conditions, no negotiation, no partial withdrawals. Everything. And if I don't? Taejin looked at the whiteboard across the room. 7 years of financial violations, mapped in his investigative director's careful handwriting, every transaction dated and sourced and cross-referenced. Then tomorrow morning, 6 investigative journalists, not 1, not 2, 6, each independently publish a fully verified account of your regulatory violations, the data broker transaction, the memo, and the specific decision-making process by which you authorized the collection of photographs of minors near a school. He paused. And they publish Seoa's testimony alongside all of it, which means whatever you do to her in response becomes part of the same story. Another silence. You've been building this for some time, Min said. 2 weeks. That's not very long. No, Taejin agreed. It isn't. A long beat, then, my consultant will contact your attorney by 3 o'clock. The line went dead. Taejin set the phone down on the document table. He sat with both hands flat on the surface and looked at the wall and breathed. His intelligence director was standing to his left, maintaining a careful neutrality that Taejin appreciated, and the room around him was full of the evidence of the last 2 weeks of his life laid out on folding tables under fluorescent lights. And outside the building, the city was moving through its ordinary late-morning rhythms, unaware. At 2:51, Min's consultant sent a formal withdrawal notice to Taejin's attorney covering all media packages, domestic and international. His attorney forwarded it with a single word appended: confirmed. At 3:20, the London outlet's editorial director sent a follow-up message confirming the package in their encrypted hold had been deleted at the source. Tajan's intelligence director placed both confirmations in front of him on the table. He read them. He set them down. He felt nothing dramatic. That was the thing about this kind of thing. The resolution of a genuine threat, when it finally came, didn't arrive with music or a sense of completion. It arrived as a fact, an absence of something, the pressure that had been there simply no longer being there, leaving only the tiredness that had been under it all along. He stood up. He put on his jacket. He told his director to maintain passive monitoring for 72 hours and then stand down all active operations related to the Min situation. He thanked the investigative team in the room, genuinely, briefly, without performance, and he walked out of the building into the cold afternoon air. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call Amara. Not yet. She would have seen the withdrawal notices through her own monitoring. He had set up a passive alert system for her 3 days ago that she had accepted without comment, which he had chosen to interpret as practical rather than personal. She would know. He called Seoa. She answered after 4 rings. Her voice was carrying something he hadn't heard in it before, not distress exactly, but the particular quality of a person standing in a changed landscape, still finding their footing. It held, he said. He withdrew. A long exhale. I know, I've been watching. A pause. My father called me 40 minutes ago. How was it? Exactly what you'd expect. A beat. I've moved out of the family residence. My legal team filed a formal separation of business interests this morning. It's going to be... She stopped. It's going to be a process. If there's anything you need, I know where to call. She paused. Tajin. Was it worth it? Not to you. To her. To the boys. Was this worth what it cost? He thought about Micah reading the news before school, about the question he'd asked his mother, about the door that had closed quietly in a Seongbuk apartment while his twin brother cried and his mother sat with what she'd just told them. Ask me in a year, he said. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, but it's the honest one. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite not one. Take care of yourself, she said, and ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk with the phone in his hand and the cold moving through his jacket and the city going on doing what the city did. And he thought about the particular distance between where he was standing and a third-floor apartment in Seongbuk, where a boy named Micah had closed his bedroom door the night before and was carrying something he didn't yet know how to put down. Then his phone buzzed, a message from Amara. No preamble. Come to the school tomorrow. Not inside. The East Gate. 3:15. They walk out together. He read it 3 times. He understood exactly what it was. Not an invitation to a reunion, not forgiveness, not a resolution of anything. It was a single specific moment being offered by a woman who had spent 10 years protecting her sons from everything the world could throw at them, who had made a decision last night to tell them the truth, and who was now offering him the chance to be present for the first ordinary moment. Just boys walking out of school, nothing staged, nothing arranged, no cameras, no prepared speeches. The kind of ordinary moment that was all any of this had ever actually been about. He wrote back 2 words. I'll be there. He put the phone in his pocket. He started walking toward where his car was parked, and the afternoon light was doing something specific to the street ahead of him, low and gold and the kind of light that made even ordinary concrete look briefly like something worth looking at. And Kang Tae-jin, who had spent 41 years building an empire on the assumption that power was the only reliable currency, walked through that light, understanding something he had not understood at the beginning of any of this. The most significant thing he had done in the past 2 weeks was not the 11 names, not the dismissed advisors, not the 6 journalists or the London withdrawal or the call with Min Gwang-ho that had ended with a 3 o'clock confirmation. The most significant thing he had done was sign his name at the bottom of a handwritten contract in a warm laundromat, without negotiation, without conditions, while a woman he had wronged without knowing it watched to see whether he meant it, and then kept every single one of the promises on that page. He got to the car. He got in. He told the driver to take him home.
and home was a penthouse on the 41st floor with a city view that cost more than most people made in a decade. And it was entirely empty of the things that had turned out to matter. And for the first time in his life, he sat in it fully aware of both those facts at once and did not look away from either of them. Tomorrow at 3:15, the East Gate. He set an alarm for 2 o'clock because he intended to be early, and because the one thing he had learned with complete clarity over the past 2 weeks was that for the people he now understood he was responsible for, being early mattered and being there mattered. And those two things, being early and being there, were the entire architecture of what it meant to be a father to boys who had no reason yet to trust him and every reason to need him to prove that they should. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 2 weeks, he slept. He was at the East Gate at 2:53, 22 minutes early. He had told himself 2 o'clock and then woken at 1:47 and lain in the dark for 3 minutes before getting up. Because lying in the dark at 1:47 pretending that sleep was still a realistic option was a form of self-deception he no longer had much patience for. He had showered and dressed without the suit, dark trousers, a plain charcoal wool jacket, nothing that announced itself. He had stood in front of his closet for longer than he usually stood in front of his closet, understanding that what he wore to this moment carried a specific weight, that arriving in the armor of his professional identity would be its own kind of statement, and that the statement he needed to make today had nothing to do with armor. He drove himself. No driver. He hadn't driven himself anywhere in 4 years, and the car, one of 3 he owned, the most anonymous of them, handled the city traffic with a responsiveness that he found, unexpectedly, steadying. Something about having his hands on something that responded directly to him. No intermediaries, no filters. Just the pressure of his palms on the wheel and the car doing what the wheel asked of it. He parked 2 streets away and walked. The school was a mid-size international institution that occupied a full city block, the kind of building that had been designed with the specific intention of feeling both serious and approachable. Brick facade, wide windows, a courtyard visible through the front gate where a few students were already gathered despite the cold, waiting for the final bell. The East Gate was quieter than the main entrance. A side exit, really, a wide metal gate set into the perimeter wall that opened onto a side street lined with bare-branched trees. A few parents were already there, 2 of them talking to each other, one woman alone on her phone, a man with a stroller who appeared to be waiting for an older sibling. Tejan stood near the wall, to the side, slightly back from the gate itself. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. He watched the gate. He had been in rooms with men who wanted to kill him and had stood there with less tension in his body than he felt standing at an elementary school gate at 3 in the afternoon. The bell rang at 3:14, a minute early, which surprised him, and then didn't. Schools ran on their own internal logic, and he knew nothing about it, had known nothing about it, had missed 10 years of the accumulated small knowledge that parents built without noticing they were building it, the way bells ran and dismissal procedures worked, and which exit the twins used and whether they came out together or separately, and 100 other details so ordinary they were invisible to anyone who hadn't spent the past decade being absent for all of them. The gate opened at 3:17. Children came through in the specific way children came through school exits, in clusters and pairs, backpacks bouncing, voices overlapping, the particular energy of people who had been contained for several hours and were no longer required to be. Parents stepped forward, names were called. A small girl ran directly into a man's legs, and he caught her without looking up from his phone and then looked up immediately after. Guilty in the way parents became guilty when they caught themselves being distracted at the moments that mattered. Tejan watched the gate. He saw Noah first. He recognized him from the surveillance photograph, the animated one, the talker, the boy with his hands in perpetual motion. And in person, that quality was even more present. Noah came through the gate already mid-sentence in a conversation with a boy beside him, his backpack worn on one shoulder in defiance of its obvious structural purpose, his face carrying the open, forward-leaning energy of someone for whom the world was a series of interesting things happening in sequence. He was laughing at something his friend had said, a real laugh, the kind that came from the body rather than the face. And for a moment, Tejan simply watched him without moving and felt something in his chest do something wordless and enormous. Then Micah came through the gate. He was 2 steps behind Noah,
which Tai Jin would later understand was simply how they moved through the world. Noah at the front, generating momentum, and Micah slightly behind, watching, processing, carrying whatever the moment contained and not releasing it until he'd turned it over completely. Micah was carrying his backpack on both shoulders, correctly, and he was looking at his brother with the specific expression of someone who found the person they loved most, both deeply entertaining and mildly exhausting. He was taller than he'd appeared in the photograph. His face had the careful, watchful quality that Amara had described, the boy who carried things and didn't put them down easily. And when his eyes moved across the small crowd of waiting adults, they moved with the specific attentiveness of someone who had learned to read rooms. His eyes found Taejin. Taejin did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, back from the gate, hands in his pockets, and he let Micah look at him without doing anything with his face except being there. Not smiling, not opening his arms, not making any gesture that would require the boy to respond to it, just standing still and being present and letting Micah decide what to do with that. Micah looked at him for 4 seconds. Then he said something to Noah. Noah's head came around and he located Taejin, and his expression shifted. Not frightened, not hostile, something more complicated and more honest than either of those. He said something back to Micah. Micah replied. Noah nodded. Then they both walked toward him. Taejin breathed in through his nose and kept his hands in his pockets and watched them come. Noah reached him first. He stopped at a reasonable distance. Not close, not far. The distance of someone who was curious and cautious in equal measure, and looked up at him with his mother's directness, wearing his own specific version of it. "You're taller than I thought," he said. "I've been told that," Taejin said. "Mom said you'd be early." She was right. Noah considered this. "She's usually right," he said, in the tone of someone reporting an observed fact rather than paying a compliment. Micah was standing slightly to Noah's left and slightly behind him, and he was looking at Taejin with an expression that Taejin could not fully read. It contained things that were not yet resolved, things that were still moving through the process of being understood, and Micah was not the kind of person who performed resolution before it was real. He said nothing for a moment. He simply looked. And Taejin held the look and said nothing either, because the boy standing in front of him deserved to take as much time as he needed and to not have that time filled with someone else's discomfort. "She told us last night," Micah said finally. His voice was lower than Noah's, more controlled, about what happened, all of it. "I know," Taejin said. "I read the statement this morning. The woman, Seoa. Yes. She gave up a lot. Not a question, a statement that wanted acknowledgement." "She did," Taejin said. "It cost her something real." Micah processed this. His jaw moved slightly in the way Taejin had seen it move in the surveillance photograph, the physical manifestation of internal work being done. "Why did she do it?" he said. "She didn't know us." Taejin thought about Seoa's voice on the phone. He talked about the children's faces in those photographs like they were, "Because some things are and some things aren't," he said. She knew the difference. Micah looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at his brother. Something passed between them. The specific silent communication of twins, the compressed language of people who had shared every significant experience of their lives, and Noah gave a small nod that meant something Taejin couldn't decode, but that seemed to function as permission for something. Micah looked back at Taejin. "We're going to walk home," he said. "Mom's making dinner. It takes 40 minutes. A pause. "You can walk with us," Micah said, "if you want." The words were simple, and they cost the boy something to say. Taejin could see that it cost him something, in the particular set of his shoulders and the careful flatness of his voice that was trying not to reveal how much the offering mattered to the one making it. He had his mother's discipline and he had his father's pride, and at 10 years old, he was already navigating the specific difficulty of those two inheritances being present in the same body at the same time. "I'd like that," Taejin said. He kept his voice the same level he'd kept it for the whole conversation. Not warm in a way that performed warmth, but real, the way things were real when you stopped managing them. They walked. Noah talked. He talked about the school debate Micah had been preparing for, which he referenced with the proprietary enthusiasm of a sibling who had been living alongside someone else's obsession for months. He knew the topic, knew the opposing arguments, had apparently been deployed as practice audience on multiple occasions, and had opinions about which of Micah's arguments landed and which ones needed work, and he delivered these opinions with complete confidence.
Micah listened to this with the expression of someone who found the critique annoying and mostly accurate. Once, he corrected a detail Noah had gotten wrong about the argument structure, and Noah immediately accepted the correction and incorporated it into his next sentence without breaking pace, which told Taejin something about how they functioned together.
Taejin walked slightly to the side, not between them, not at the front. He listened. He asked one question about the debate topic when there was a natural space for it, a genuine question, not a parenting performance. And Noah answered it at length, and Micah answered it more briefly and with greater precision. And the three of them had a short exchange about it that was the most ordinary conversation Taejin had participated in since he could clearly remember. On the third block, Noah fell slightly behind to investigate something on a fence. A cat, it turned out, with the kind of focused orange indifference that cats maintained as a matter of principle. And Taejin and Micah walked the half block alone. Micah didn't speak immediately. He walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the ground the way Taejin had watched him look at the ground in that first photograph. The posture of someone who was thinking something they weren't ready to say yet. Then, "She cried last night, after she thought we were asleep." He said it without looking up. "She didn't want us to hear, but I heard." Taejin said nothing. He waited. "She's done that before. When things were hard." Micah's voice was flat but not hard. Just flat, in the way that flatness functioned as a container for things that didn't yet have another form. "She thinks we don't know. Noah knows too. We don't tell her we know because—" He stopped. "Because knowing would add something to what she's already carrying," Taejin said. Micah looked up at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The recognition of hearing an accurate description of something you'd been holding without the language for it. "Yeah," he said. They walked. "I'm not going to pretend 10 years didn't happen," Taejin said. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm going to make it up to you. I don't know what that would even look like, and I think you'd know if I was performing something rather than meaning it." Micah was listening. His eyes were forward, but the quality of his attention was entirely directed. "What I can tell you is what I'm going to do," Taejin continued. "I'm going to show up when I say I'm going to show up. I'm going to ask your mother before I ask you anything. I'm going to learn things. The things you like, the things you don't, how you work, by paying attention rather than by making you explain yourself to me." He paused. "And when I get things wrong, I'm going to say so directly, without excuses." Micah was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a lot of things." "Yes. People say a lot of things." "I know," Taejin said. "You should watch what I do." Micah looked at him then. A full look, direct, the kind that assessed without apology, the kind that a 10-year-old who had been the man of his household since before he could articulate what that meant had developed because it was necessary, because someone had to look at things clearly, and he had decided early that the someone was him. He held the look for a long moment. Then Noah came jogging back with news about the cat's eye color that he considered significant, and the moment closed as naturally as it had opened, and the three of them walked the last 2 blocks to the apartment building with Noah talking and Micah listening and Taejin walking slightly to the side, present without occupying more space than he'd been given. Amara was in the kitchen when they came in. She heard the door and came to the kitchen doorway, dish towel in one hand, and she looked at the three of them standing in the entry, her sons shedding their backpacks with the practiced carelessness of children in their own home, and Taejin standing just inside the door, still in his jacket, hands at his sides. And her face did something quiet and complex and entirely private. She didn't announce what she felt. She turned back to the kitchen and said, over her shoulder, "Wash your hands. Both of you. Dinner's 20 minutes. The boys went. The apartment swallowed them into its domestic routine. The sound of a faucet, Noah's voice resuming a conversation that apparently required no audience to continue, a door opening and closing. Amara came back to the kitchen doorway with the dish towel still in her hand. She looked at Taejin. "How was the walk?" she said. "Good," he said. Then, because it was accurate, "Micah talked to me." Something moved in her face at that. something she allowed to be visible for exactly 1 second before she put it away. She nodded once. "Sit down," she said. "You're not a guest who stands in the entry." He sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was exactly what he would have expected from the intelligence file, and completely different from how he'd imagined it. Smaller, warmer, with the accumulated texture of actual life on every surface. Children's drawings were pinned to a corkboard near the window, not the current art of 10-year-olds, but older pieces, the kind parents kept because they marked something. A row of books on a low shelf beside the couch, organized with the imperfect logic of someone who read them rather than displayed them. 2 pairs of soccer cleats near the door, different sizes, both muddy. Amara moved between the kitchen counter and the stove with the efficiency of someone who had been feeding people in a small space for a long time and had stopped noticing the efficiency. She didn't speak for a few minutes, and neither did he, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It had the specific quality of a silence between 2 people who had said most of what needed saying and were now simply occupying the same space, which was its own form of progress. "Han Doyun called me," she said without looking up from the stove. He went still. "When?" "3 days ago. I didn't tell you because I needed to decide what to do about it first." She stirred something, put the spoon down, turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms folded. Not defensive, just the posture of someone who had made a decision and was now delivering it. "He's an old man. He spent 40 minutes telling me things I already knew and things I didn't. He said he knew what he should have done and didn't do it, and that no apology was adequate." She paused. "He asked if there was anything he could do. What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." Her eyes held his. "He told me something you didn't, about the days right after I left, after they made me leave. He said you didn't eat for 4 days. He said you sat in your office and didn't speak to anyone, and after 4 days you came out and never mentioned me again, and he understood then that you had decided that was the only way to survive it." Taejin said nothing. "I didn't know that," Amara said. "I spent 10 years thinking you'd thrown me away, and moved on in about a week." She unfolded her arms and turned back to the stove. "I'm not telling you it changes what happened. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that I know it." The apartment made its small sounds around them. Noah's voice somewhere down the hall, now apparently in dialogue with someone, possibly an imaginary interlocutor or possibly his brother, and the sound of the stove and the smell of something cooking that was plain and good. "I should have looked for you," Taejin said. She didn't respond immediately. She kept her eyes on the stove. "I told myself you'd made your choice," he said. "That you'd left, and that was the truth of it, and building a story around it was weakness. I was 29 years old, and I was taking over an organization, and I made not looking for you into a principle." He paused. "It wasn't a principle. It was easier than the alternative." "Yes," she said, quietly, without heat. "It was. I'm not asking you to forgive that." "Good." She glanced at him over her shoulder, and in the glance was something that was not warm and not cold, but had the specific quality of honesty that only came from people who had moved through something difficult enough to burn the performance off them. "I'm not there yet. I don't know if I will be. That's the truth." "I know," he said. "I'm not here for forgiveness." "Why are you here?" "Because Micah said I could walk home with them." A pause. "And because you called me." She turned around fully then and looked at him across the small kitchen with the dish towel in her hand and the food on the stove behind her and whatever assessment she was running, the one she'd been running since the laundromat, since the letters, since a night 10 years ago in a room with 2 lawyers and a document she had signed alone, reached something that wasn't a conclusion but was adjacent to one. "You'll stay for dinner," she said. Not a question this time. "Yes," he said. The boys came back into the kitchen in the chaotic way boys came back into kitchens. Noah first, already asking what was for dinner. Micah behind him doing the automatic quick scan of the room that Taejin recognized as his own habit. The unconscious inventory of changed conditions. Micah registered Taejin still at the table and didn't react, which was itself a form of acceptance. The acceptance of someone who had decided to allow a thing to be present without requiring it to justify its presence every moment. Amara's sister arrived at 6. A woman named Diane, who was built like Amara, but louder.
who came through the door with a container of something she'd made and an immediate and complete lack of interest in Taejin's discomfort, which she apparently intuited the moment she saw him sitting at the kitchen table and decided was not her problem. She looked at him once, looked at Amara, and said, "So this is happening," with the tone of someone updating a mental file. And then she went to the kitchen and started talking to Amara about something entirely unrelated, which was more gracious than he'd expected and more disorienting than hostility would have been. The elderly neighbor arrived at 6:15. Her name was Mrs. Pack, and she was 73 years old, and she had, according to what Taejin had learned from Amara's description in the laundromat weeks ago, been the woman who sat with the boys when Amara worked night shifts, who had learned enough English in her 70s to hold basic conversations with two American children, who had brought them soup when they were sick and scolded them gently when they were loud and had functioned, without title or salary, as the anchor point of a support network that a woman alone in a foreign country had built out of pure necessity and the specific kindness of one good neighbor. Mrs. Pack came through the door with the unannounced comfort of someone who had been through that door hundreds of times and registered Taejin with the direct assessment of a woman who had spent 73 years reading situations accurately. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said something in Korean, briefly, and moved toward the kitchen. "What did she say?" Taejin asked Micah quietly. Micah's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, something that was considering becoming one. "She said you look tired and someone should feed you something." "She's not wrong," Taejin said. Micah looked at him for a moment. Then the thing that had been considering becoming a smile made its decision, briefly, before Micah recovered it, and he turned toward the kitchen, and Taejin watched him go and allowed himself to feel the full weight of what that fraction of an expression had cost the boy, and what it had meant for him to let it happen anyway. Dinner was the most ordinary meal Taejin had eaten in 41 years. The table was not large enough for 6 people comfortably, and they sat at it with the specific negotiated closeness of people who were accustomed to making small spaces work. Diane served herself before passing anything and made no apology for it. Mrs. Pack ate with the focused satisfaction of someone who had cooked enough meals in her life to understand that eating them was the point. Noah talked through most of the meal, about school, about the upcoming debate, about a soccer match that had happened 2 weeks ago that apparently still merited extended analysis. And Amara listened and redirected and corrected the record on 2 specific facts with the automatic precision of a woman who had presided over 10 years of dinners and had not surrendered accuracy to conversational flow. Micah ate and was mostly quiet and occasionally said something that was brief and exactly right. And the table received these contributions the way a table received contributions from someone whose observations were known to be accurate, which was with attention rather than noise. Taejin answered when asked. He didn't volunteer. He helped clear the plates when dinner was done without waiting to be told. He watched what Mrs. Pak did and did the same thing, which seemed to be the correct protocol. And Diane watched this with an expression that suggested she was updating the mental file further. After dinner, Noah remembered the birthday present he'd been assigned to make for his friend's party and disappeared to his room with the specific urgency of someone who had just recalled an overdue obligation. Mrs. Pak and Diane moved to the small sitting area with tea, their conversation shifting to Korean with the naturalness of people reverting to the register of comfort. Amara began washing the dishes and Taejin stood beside her at the counter and dried them. And they did this in the silence that had by now established itself as the particular silence of 2 people who were not pretending to be something they weren't yet, and were not pretending they weren't something they had been. Micah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was holding a folder. Taejin recognized the format, the weekly investigation reports he had been sending through Amara as per the contract. He had sent 4 of them, each one a documented account of the conspiracy, every person involved, every action taken, every piece of evidence gathered, and what it proved. Factual. Unsentimental. Without apology or self-justification. Micah held the folder. I read these, he said. Taejin set down the dish he was drying. I know, your mother told me. You wrote them for her, not for me. Yes, but you knew I might read them. He thought about this honestly. I hoped you might. Micah looked at the folder in his hands. The man who helped force her out, Han Do-yoon. He stopped, reorganized. He's still free. Yes. Why?
Tajin leaned against the counter. Amara had gone still beside him, not watching them directly but present, her hands quiet on the edge of the sink. Because what he did was wrong, and what it cost your family was real and not forgivable, he said. But he's 68 years old, and he spent 40 years serving a man who used that loyalty to make him complicit in something he knew was wrong and didn't stop. And I've decided that destruction isn't the same thing as justice. Ich me pasi kasum. He paused. He's been removed from everything. He has nothing left to protect and nothing left to use. That's as far as I'm taking it. Micah considered this for a long moment. His expression was doing the internal processing work Tajin had come to recognize as its most characteristic feature. Is that justice? He said. I don't know, Tajin said. I think it's what I can honestly do. Micah nodded slowly. Not agreeing necessarily. Processing. You could have lied, he said. You could have said yes, it's justice. I could have. Why didn't you? Because you would have known, Tajin said. The moment between them settled. Outside the kitchen window, the city was doing its evening thing, lit and moving, indifferent, going on. And in the kitchen, the air smelled like food and dish soap and the specific warmth of a small space where people had eaten together. Micah set the folder on the counter. He didn't say anything else. He turned and went back down the hall, and a moment later, Tajin heard the sound of his door. Not closed this time, just pulled to, the specific distance of someone who was leaving a gap rather than shutting a thing out. Amara turned on the water again. They finished the dishes. He left at 8:30. The boys were in their rooms. Diane and Mrs. Pack had said their goodbyes with varying degrees of warmth. Diane, with a handshake that was firm and brief and carried approximately 14 separate assessments compressed into its grip. Mrs. Pack, with a look that communicated something he didn't have the language for but understood was not hostile. And Amara walked him to the door with the dish towel over her shoulder. He put on his jacket. The debate, he said. When is it? 3 weeks, Saturday morning. She was watching him with that direct diagnostic attention. The auditorium at the school. Can I come? She looked at him for a moment. Ask Micah, she said. He nodded. He reached for the door handle. Then he stopped. He turned back because there was one thing left and he had been deciding the whole evening whether to say it, and had finally decided that not saying it was the same cowardice he had practiced for 10 years, and he was done practicing it. I'm sorry, he said. Not for what my father did. Not for what was done to you. That apology isn't mine to make, and you deserve more than me performing it. I'm sorry for the 4 days and all the days after them, for deciding that not looking for you was a principle, for building a life on the story I told myself instead of the truth. He held her eyes. That part was mine. That belongs to me. Amara looked at him for a long time. The apartment was quiet around them, the evening sounds of it. Mrs. Pack's laugh from the sitting room, muffled, the distant sound of Noah's voice through a closed door, and outside the traffic going past, and the city beyond it, and all the ordinary, irreducible texture of a life that had been built without him. I know, she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely real, and carried the full weight of what she was choosing not to say alongside what she was. Good night, Taijin. Good night, he said. He walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the cold evening air. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in front of the building, an ordinary residential building on an ordinary street, 6 stories of lit windows with different lives behind each one. And he looked up at the 3rd floor where the light in the kitchen was still on, and a smaller light was visible in what he now knew was Micah's window. And he stood there and breathed in the cold air, and let everything that the evening had been simply be what it was, without managing it or organizing it into something useful. 3 weeks later, he sat in the back row of the school auditorium. He arrived early enough to secure the specific seat he wanted. Left side, last row, good sightline to the stage, but far enough back that no one who wasn't looking for him would see him. He wore the same plain charcoal jacket. He had told his driver to wait 2 blocks away and had walked, which by now was simply what he did when he came to Seongbuk. The auditorium filled around him, parents and students and a few teachers moving through the rows with the organized chaos of a school event, finding seats, negotiating space, the low murmur of people settling into a shared occasion. He recognized no one. No one recognized him. He was a man in a charcoal jacket sitting in the back row, which was exactly what he had come here to be. Micah walked out onto the stage with 5 other students, and Tajan felt his hands press flat against his thighs. Not from nerves, or not only from nerves, but from the specific bodily response to seeing something matter in a way you can't control the outcome of, the helplessness that came with caring. Micah stood at the podium and looked out at the auditorium with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. Careful, complete, not performing readiness, but actually ready. And when the moderator signaled, he spoke. He was precise. He was prepared. He was, in the specific way that certain people were, made for this. The organized argument, the controlled delivery, the instinct for when to slow down and let something land. He argued without aggression and without apology, which was the most difficult combination and the most effective. When his opponent made a point that was actually good, Micah acknowledged it before dismantling it, which was the move of someone who understood that dismissing a good point made you look less credible and engaging, it made you look more. Tajan sat in the back row and watched his son argue in front of an audience and felt the particular pride that was not the pride of possession or achievement, but the pride of witness, of being allowed to see something that existed entirely independently of you, that had developed and become itself without your participation. And that was genuinely remarkable on its own terms. Micah's team won. The auditorium produced the specific noise of a collective outcome, parents clapping and students reacting, and the organized chaos of a concluded event reasserting itself. And Tajan sat in the back row and clapped without standing because he had been told to sit in the back row and not make the day about himself, and he intended to honor that instruction precisely. As the auditorium began to empty, his phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. Then he read the first word and recognized it. Dad. His hands went still. Can you wait outside the east gate? I want to introduce you to my coach. He read it 3 times. He was not a man who cried. He was not going to cry in the back row of a school auditorium during a middle school debate event. He sat there for a moment with the phone in his hands and simply let the word exist. The specific small word that his son had chosen to type, on his own terms, in his own time, without anyone asking him to. And then he stood up and put the phone in his pocket and walked out of the auditorium into the cold, clear afternoon. He waited at the east gate. Micah came out 12 minutes later with a teacher-aged man carrying a briefcase and an expression of someone who had just had a very good afternoon. Micah introduced them simply. This is my coach. This is my dad. The coach shook Tajan's hand and said Micah was one of the most disciplined students he'd worked with, and Tajan said he wasn't surprised. And the conversation lasted 4 minutes, ordinary and complete. And then the coach excused himself, and it was just Tajan and Micah on the sidewalk in the late afternoon light. Micah put his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked at the ground for a moment, in the way he looked at the ground when he was thinking something he hadn't finished yet. Then he looked up. You stayed in the back row, he said. Yes. The whole time? Yes. Micah nodded slowly, not in surprise. More like a box being checked on something that had been under observation for a while, a data point being added to a sequence that was reaching a preliminary conclusion. Okay, he said. He started walking toward the street, the direction of the apartment. He glanced back. Are you coming? Tajan fell into step beside him. They walked without talking for a full block, and the silence was not uncomfortable, and not comfortable, and not anything neat. It was simply 2 people walking in the same direction at the same pace, which was its own kind of beginning. Not dramatic, not declared, not the product of any single moment of resolution, but built of all the small undramatic things that had preceded it and would follow it. On the twins' birthday, 3 weeks after that, he arrived at the apartment with a bag of fresh fruit. He had thought about what to bring for longer than he would admit to anyone. He had considered and rejected a dozen things that were too large, too expensive, too laden with the weight of what he was trying not to perform. He had settled on fruit because it was ordinary, and because Mrs. Pak had, on the evening of the dinner, said something to Amara in Korean that Micah had quietly translated for him as, bring something for the table, not for yourself, and he had taken that as the most useful advice he'd received in recent memory. Around a table that was not large enough for everyone, and managed everyone anyway, sat Amara and the twins, Diane, Mrs. Pak, and the twins' closest friend from school, a boy named James who apparently required no ceremony and had helped himself to the first piece of cake before the candles were fully extinguished, which the table received as entirely appropriate. After dinner, Noah stood up with the particular purposeful energy of someone who had been rehearsing something. He looked around the table. "I want to do a toast," he said. "Mom said I could." Amara's expression held the specific mix of affection and readiness that parents wore when children announced intentions of uncertain scope. Noah raised his glass. He looked at his mother. "To Mom," he said, "who never gave up." His voice was Noah's voice, full, forward, without self-consciousness. And he meant every word of it in the simple way that people meant things when they had not yet learned to be guarded about meaning them. And the table was quiet with it for a moment. Then Noah turned. He looked at Tae-jin. His expression was open and careful at the same time, the way 10-year-olds were open and careful when they were doing something they understood to be significant. "And to Dad," he said, "who came back." The words landed in the room, and the room held them. Tae-jin looked at the boy who had said them. He looked at Amara, who was watching with her hands quiet on the table and her face carrying everything she was choosing not to say, alongside the one thing she was allowing herself to feel visibly, which was this specific moment, her son saying dad to a man who had missed 10 years and was here now. And the word meaning something real because it had been offered freely rather than demanded. Then Micah raised his glass. He had been watching the whole exchange with the careful attention that was his specific mode of existing in the world. And when he raised his glass, he did it slowly, the way he did everything. Deliberately, without performance, having decided to do the thing and now doing it. He looked at Tae-jin directly. His expression was not warm in any easy way. It was the expression of someone who had been paying attention for 3 weeks and had arrived at a provisional conclusion and was willing to say so. "To the man who's still learning," Micah said. The table was quiet. Tae-jin looked at his older son, at the careful face and the contained expression and the glass held level and the 10 years of absence that stood between them and the 3 weeks of presence that were just beginning to weigh against it. And he nodded once. No speech. No promises. No declaration of what he would be or what he intended. He raised his glass. He drank. And the birthday went on around that table the way good evenings went on, imperfectly, warmly, with someone talking too loud and someone saying something that made everyone laugh, and the food getting cold because no one wanted to stop the conversation to eat it. And Kang Tae-jin sat in the middle of it in a chair that was slightly too small and ate cake off a plate with a chip in the rim and understood, with the specific clarity that only came on the other side of losing something and finding it again in a different form, that he had spent 41 years building things designed to last. He had built the wrong things. What lasted was this: a table with too many people around it, and a boy who had decided to call him dad, and another boy who was still learning whether he could, and a woman who had survived what was done to her and had built something real from it, and an elderly neighbor who had told him to bring something for the table and not for yourself, and the specific weight of ordinary evening air in a small apartment that smelled like food and warmth, and the accumulated texture of people living their actual lives together. He had not won anything. He had been given a chance to begin. He intended to keep showing up for it, every ordinary day of it, for the rest of his life.